and welcome to another Bookish video from me, Johanna, me, my dog and books. Someone's decided she's going to appear in today's video, haven't you, Lucy? Haven't you? So she's sitting on me, or should I say I'm sitting in her chair. I'll bring you a bit closer. Here we go. A wee bitty closer. All seems without my... I think I just pressed the emergency button there. Or should I say, my phone stand did. My phone stand did. Anyway, Lucy's decided she's just going to lie here. Will I chat to you about November books? And what am I going to chat to you about? Well, I made some notes and I decided... Let's see, this is not helpful. I decided... Look at this. She's the boss of me because Patty's in the office with her dad. And Lucy, you're kind of not... Lucy, that's not hugely comfortable. Sit there. I'm there so I can... thingy my leg. Anyway, I thought, well, something I often do, will I manage it this month? Unconfirmed, but I have done in previous months, and I do, despite my recent wrap-ups, which have been not very non-fiction focused. It's November non-fiction. Non-fiction November? A lot of people will read non-fiction in November. I don't know who started this, to be fair. I've done it in the last few years. But anywho's, I thought this was a good time to give you some non-fiction recommendations. So I've made a little list, and Lucy's been very demanding with her paw, aren't you? Aren't you? And I'm going to touch on, I've got about 10 here. I've got many more recommendations I can give you, but I thought I'll start with some 10 sort of 5-star reads that I have. Half of which are kind of like memoirs, so we'll focus on them first and then I'll talk to you about that kind of other non-fiction genre. Now, I can't not talk to you about memoirs without mentioning one of my favourites from last year, which I can confirm I've read twice. And despite not being a fan back in the day, I kind of went in going, oh, this almost reading this book to see how cheesy it might be. Like, who is the real Pérez Hilton? And it is Pérez the Memoir. And geez, oh, I did not expect to give this 5 stars. I did. I've read it twice. I'd probably read it a third time. And it was utterly fascinating. I had no idea about the troubled teen industry. What happened to her while she admits she was growing up and she was a bit out of control. She was sneaking out and going clubbing, and she then divulges the brutal camp that she pretty much got kidnapped from her own home to be taken to, and was stuck there for a long time, facing emotional, physical and other abuse. And wow, like, this was mind-blowing, and it made me have a whole other appreciation for her as a person. She talks about how her, and this would have been like the 90s and early noughties, where the likes of her, Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears were all targeted really badly by the paparazzi. They were demonised as women in a way that men weren't and still never have been. She talks about how Pérez Hilton, with the kind of childlike baby voice, is a whole character, and how that character came around. Honestly, it blew me away, and it gave me a whole other level of respect for Pérez Hilton. And now I think, yeah, you deserve icon status. She's iconic, and this was so insightful. So obviously I can't talk about that one without mentioning the other, which is Britney Spears' memoir. I read this on audio, and it's not, so Paris Hilton's one is read by Paris Hilton on audio. The Britney Spears one isn't. Is it Michelle Williams, I think, who reads it? And Britney does do a bit of an opener as to why she chose not to read the audio, and I think a lot of that was because of how difficult she found that as a book or a story to tell verbally. So it is really well narrated. Again, like Paris Hilton, but I would say like Paris is, if you had to pick between the two and could only pick one, I would say go with Paris, unless you're a mega Britney fan. I was more of a Britney fan than I was Paris fan, to be fair. A lot of her story you're kind of partly aware of, but it was so interesting to see her side of everything after the conservatorship, is that what you call it? And her relationship with her family, her mother, her sister, her dad, how toxic all of that was, and how much effectively Britney Spears was just an absolute commodity for her parents to make money from. It was heartbreaking, but it was utterly fascinating to read. And I think that's because we've been fed so much information and news about Britney Spears since she came around. So everybody thinks they have this perception and opinion of her, and because of her conservatorship and what she's been through with like Justin Timberlake, and she talks quite openly about what happened in respect of when she fell pregnant with him, and honest to God. See, when you read that, like you're kind of aware of it at the time, and then when you reflect back, like how Justin Timberlake was treated versus how Britney Spears was treated during that time is polar opposites. And that's because Britney is a woman, and she was a girl at the time. Absolutely abhorrent how we portray women or absolute brutalise women in the media in comparison to someone like Justin Timberlake. When you hear about that story, and her very open and honest story, and I think that's where we all think we have an idea of who Britney Spears is, and it was actually really interesting to hear her side now that she's free of the conservatorship, where she's able to tell her story in her words. So another one I highly recommend. This is just coming in to join in on book 3, which is a memoir. I think, would you call it? Yeah, it's called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. So loads of people, I think I'm of a generation that's a bit too old to know who Jennette McCurdy was back in the like, whatever, is it Disney, Nickelodeon days, etc. So I was not aware of her as an actor or as a child star at all. So I suppose the reason I'm saying that is because I knew nothing about Jennette McCurdy other than the cover grabbed me, obviously the title, and I'd heard good reviews, so I thought I'm going to give this a read. I've no idea what it's about. And that's when I learned that she was actually quite a well-known child kind of Hollywood star back in the kind of, I don't know if it was Ariana Grande days or whatever. I'm too old for that. I'm too old to have grown up seeing all that. That didn't matter. This book was so well written about Jennette's relationship with her mother, which was utterly toxic. That was like obviously the mother of a child star, and what her mother put her through was absolutely eye-opening. Yet I don't know if I think her background is obviously comedy. She has this amazing way of telling the story about her life, her body image, her everything, that basically you should be able to rely on a parent to support you. Her mother was the opposite of this, hence the title, which is pretty dark. In saying that, Jennette writes this in such a way where one minute she could be telling you something really disturbing about her childhood, and then the next minute I could absolutely laugh out loud, which is quite a unique ability given the topic that she talks about, which is really, she talks about her obviously toxic parental relationship, childhood fame, the impact of that. There's a lot of body image and eating disorder and mental health stuff in here. But wow, this is, and I think Jennette McCurdy narrates the audiobook. I read it on audio and thought it was amazing. I would highly recommend it on audio if you can do audio. If not, obviously read it in print or ebook. But yeah, like, if you know who Jennette McCurdy is, you'll really enjoy this book. If you have no idea who Jennette McCurdy is, you will really enjoy this book. So those are 3 memoirs of kind of famous people. We'll say kind of famous people, they are famous people. The other one, which I suppose ties in a little bit with humour, is Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. Memoir in the fact that it's maybe not her total life, but it's a portion of her life. She's written quite a few books, and Jenny Lawson is someone that talks really openly about her mental health and her mental health struggles, as well as just being absolutely hilariously funny about it and what it's like to live with her and her mental health or mental illnesses that she has, in which she's very open about. She has an absolute obsession with taxidermy and collecting things. And honest to goodness, is someone that, I'm sure it's anxiety, depression and a few other sort of significant mental health challenges that she has, and she talks quite openly about it, but she does it in a way where she almost she recounts like conversations and situations with her husband or other family members or friends about like what it is like to live and be with her. And honest to God, I was laughing out loud at some of this stuff, catching myself going, oh no, I'm not supposed to. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to. But she does such an amazing job of telling her story. It was so engaging. Another one I would highly recommend on audio if you can get it. If not, read it. I think I might have got it out in hardback from my local library at the time, and the cover pulled me in, and then I read the synopsis and it sounded like I didn't really know much about Jenny Lawson at the time. So I went in and I thought, see if you like stories about mental health, the reality of living with that, but also like dealing with it in a really humorous way and looking at the things that they really struggle with in an honest but humorous way, then absolutely check this book out. It's so funny, heartwarming, and really heartfelt as well. Like, honestly, I defy you not to laugh at this book. And I mean that in the kindest way possible. The next 2 are not celebrities in any shape or form. It's unfortunately they're situations that have happened to them in life that have made their memoir and them as an author of said memoir into that world of celebrity. The first one is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And this is a story, honestly, this is a hard story to read, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear anything about it. There are trigger warnings, content warnings for sexual assault, rape, etc. So Chanel's story is that of where she was raped by, I think this was at college, by someone. The judge later on down this journey of hers for justice was concerned about what such a accusation and what was the word when someone's found guilty and put to judgment, and I can't think of the words, it's not coming to my head, but basically this young man had such a promising possible swimming Olympic career. Why would we do this where we would put him to jail for him and his violence, sexual violence against women? Why would we do that? Because he's got such a promising future. That was the epitome of what Chanel was up against when she took her abuser to court for what he did to her. So this happened like, I think it was one night, and it was after parties or whatever, and she actually, I'm sure there were 2 guys who intervened at the point where, is it Brock? It's been a while since I read it. Was attempting to rape her. It was the fact that he thought he was entitled to be sexually violent towards a woman. And then it's how she talks very open and honestly about the assault, about what happened after that, obviously being at university, and the support or lack of she got there, and the support or lack of for her. Not only that, but also the support for her abuser, for a man who was sexually violent towards another woman, and how then the justice system treated her, the victim, in this. It is jaw-dropping. It's sadly unsurprising. It's heartbreaking to read. I listened to this one on audio and Chanel reads it, and it is a tough read. In her words, describing her attack, describing what continued to be an assault on her as she tried to seek justice. I say all that, and obviously if this is a, content themes that you would really struggle to read, don't, but I would say it's a very necessary read. The next one is Educated by Tara Westover. And this one is where Tara tells the story of first entering into a classroom at the age of 17 because she was homeschooled by parents who effectively were survivalists and believed and were waiting for the end of days in the mountains of Idaho, I think it was. She had parents who were stockpiling like cans of food and all of that, preparing for the end of days, didn't use doctors, didn't watch media or news. So when Tara enters school at the age of 17, she basically knows nothing about the world, and what she does know is a warped reality, which makes this story not only jaw-dropping, it's really sad, it's horrific, but in the same time utterly amazing and inspiring all at once, because you watch and listen to Tara tell the story of how she became aware of, so at the age of 17 she goes into school and she had never heard of what the Holocaust was, because she had never been taught anything out with the preparing for the end of days survivalism. Kind of reading about both the emotional and physical abuse she faced from her family as she was growing up. It is a really tough read, but it's a story that I felt was really important, because I think you can be so oblivious to the different lives different people are living, or assume that everybody has access to the same information and knowledge that you do, which is absolutely not the case. She wasn't allowed to, I don't think she was even registered with a doctor, whether she was even a kind of known person without a birth certificate. Were never seen by a doctor or a nurse. They were all dealt, no matter what it was, we're all dealt with different levels of herbalism at home. It was her own desire for knowledge and kind of teaching herself at home of mathematics and other things that got her into the kind of education journey, where she was able then to enter into high school, and where her utter mind was blown by the fact that her reality was very different to many others. Absolutely outstanding and enheartening at the same time. So those are the kind of ones that are all sort of memoirs, personal stories that I would highly recommend. Next up are another 5 that I'm going to tell you about that are non-fiction, about either events or culture and things like that. And in no particular order. The first one is Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. This starts out as a book about Naomi taking on the challenge of the fact that she's often been misidentified online. This kind of starts as a story because Naomi is often misidentified or confused with another Naomi online who is a complete opposite of her, as a vocal anti-vaxxer, very much into conspiracy theories, QAnon and all of that, which is complete opposite to an author and activist that is Naomi Klein. that is the premise of her story, and what she starts to do is what is called a trip into the mirror world, where she starts to explore the world of AI, disinformation, and just how like we can all end up in our own echo chambers of information, or how the world is changing, especially with regards to our online identity and who we portray ourselves to be and what information we're exposed to. It's really fascinating in that way. I found it utterly despairing and terrifying for most of it, until later on I actually started to think there were glimmers of hope. So I really enjoyed that, and I would highly recommend it. I think I read this one in hardback from the library, so unconfirmed about the audio, but with a lot of non-fiction. Non-fiction actually was the genre that first got me into audiobooks, and now I'll pretty much read any genre in audio. But yeah, so feel free to check out an audio, but I can't confirm anything about the narration of this one. The next one was one of my top reads of, if not last year, it was the year before, and it's The Only Plane in the Sky. And that's a book that collates a lot of the conversations and the stories of many of the victims and the survivors of 9/11. It is a shocking, emotive, powerful read. It is one that if you are able to listen to audiobooks, I would highly recommend, because the experience that gives you is intense. It's absolutely I would say, as someone that easily reads half their books, if not more, in a year or every month in audio, this is by far one of the best audiobooks I've ever read. It has a cast of like 45 people. This also feels like the story of 9/11 that has to be told. Eyewitness accounts. It's thoroughly researched, and it is an absolutely insightful read. It's such an emotive book. It's so many powerful feelings reading this. It has stayed with me for a long time after reading. So I highly recommend. The next one is very different. It's Cultish, which by Amanda Montell, who I pretty much think I've read all of her, or nearly all of her books. Like if she's written any fiction, I haven't. It's all non-fiction that I've read. And this was such a fascinating book about language, cult. So it's basically, she takes cults as what we understand it to be. So most people look at a cult and think it's a religious thing of a cult that, you know, like say Scientology or anything like that, when the reality is that many things nowadays are cults, whether it's how we follow a celebrity or influencers online or a brand. And so she talks about the language and development of language in respect to cult and cultish behaviour. So utterly fascinating, and made me realise that actually that it's not just, well, it can be like a religious experience. So if you take something like Taylor Swift and the Swifties and people's absolute devotion to Taylor Swift, that in itself, and the behaviour and the language that's used, could in itself be deemed cultish. And it's absolutely fascinating. I don't use that in a derogatory way whatsoever. It's just an understanding of how over the years our language and behaviour has developed from cults being very religious focused, and how that has changed over time. But also, like, a really interesting thing is, like, what is the difference between a cult and a religion? And I can't verbatim remember the quote, but fundamentally it was like the passage of time. So, you know, Catholicism back in the early times when Catholicism was becoming a kind of more popular religion, at that time there would have been people that looked to that as a type of cult. And the same will be said of many other religions that become almost like accepted or normalised. Absolutely fascinating. Highly recommend an audio as well. And I would pretty much highly recommend any books that this author writes. Next sounds a bit sciencey, but actually really isn't. Just in case that puts anyone off, it actually can intrigue me, but it's not overly sciencey. It's very much about our everyday life and world and the things that are developed that we use in our day-to-day life. and how they really are built not with women in mind. And it's called Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed by Men. I also listened to this in audiobook and it got me angry. It got me raging, like female rage, at how much in our world around us, from urban design to like the designing of cities and, you know, like road planning, cars, phones, software for like customer data for like getting into your local gym, so much is designed without women in mind, and it is utterly angering. What it starts to talk about is not only does this data bias towards a world designed by men that doesn't include women, is not only costs women time and money, it can often cost them their lives. And that's when we talk about a lot of the medical research and medical care and insights that have that basically don't take women's bodies or do any research on women whatsoever, like breast cancer, for example, or heart attacks. This stuff will blow your absolute mind on how much women are not involved in the design of the world around us. I mean, it's utterly overwhelming, the gender gap. Yeah, we kind of know it's there, but like, until I read this, now when did I read it? 2022. Until I read this, I hadn't quite realised how ingrained the patriarchy or men were in the world. Like, I know, but like to the point where, for example, a system where a woman is trying to check in, like swipe her access card to get into her gym, and it's not recognizing her. I mean, she's joined online, for example, and her salutation is doctor. So you can tell you where I'm going here. The system that had been built by men that was being used in local gyms was assuming that a doctor was a man and could not therefore put the two and two together, that a woman could also be a doctor. So her ability to access her local gym, totally simple request, was blocked because it's like, doctor equal man. I mean, it is... I've said jaw-dropping quite a few of these, but it's absolutely jaw-dropping how much women are excluded from everything around us, in the development of everything around us, from tech to street planning to medical care. But what I would say is it's such a necessary read for all genders, because it really exposes how much people, the human race, are missing out without having a female's input and as part of research development of all, from medical care right through to, like, mate, I might not be a parent, but the women are the only people for developing the human race, do you know what I mean? And if we're being excluded from everything that are around our world, that's a fundamental issue, not just for gender rights, but just for all. Read it. It will blow your utter mind. And last but not least, is a bit more historical fiction. No, bit more historical non-fiction, and this is The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. And completely different to all the books that I've just spoken to you. This is a necessary and in-depth story of the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. These stories are often the ones that are lost in over a course of time, as the story tends to be, as in many cases even through to modern day, is that the story becomes about not the victims but the perpetrators. What I would say about this book is it's thoroughly researched and it gives you an absolute insight into Victorian life, both for the upper, middle and lower class during the reign of Ripper during those times. It gives a voice to Jack the Ripper's victims, which is something that has been lost over time, and something I admit that I didn't know much about. I would say, like, Obviously this is non-fiction, but and if you tend not to gravitate toward non-fiction, I would say if you're at all interested in crime fiction or true crime, you would find this really, really interesting. It's a necessary read and utterly fascinating. So there are, I think, 10. Let me check. Possibly 11, because I can't count so quickly on the video there. Non-fiction book recommendations that I am passing on in the hope that you might find a book or two in there that you actually find really insightful, fascinating, funny, tragic, all of those possibly at once. Let me know in the comments if you've A, read any of these, B, if you're a non-fiction reader. If not, do any of these kind of interest you at all? Will you be reading any non-fiction in November or any other month? And also hit me in the comments with any of your non-fiction recommendations. I've read loads of non-fictions over the years, but these were some of the kind of top ones that kind of keep coming back to me when people would maybe say, can you recommend any non-fiction? And I'll go kind of a little bit memoir and then a bit more about culture or true crime and things. So yeah, give me any of your recommendations in the comments, not just for me, but for any other watchers who will obviously have a wee look and check what your recommendations are. Let me know if you like this video by giving it a thumbs up or a like, a love heart. And if you've watched to the very end, give me one dog emoji, because we've only got Lucy with us here today. Look. She's lying on my trusty laptop that I was using to check that I got all the titles of the books right. Thankfully. I think we're okay, aren't we? Oh, are you going to get typing? The pause out, the pause out. So yeah, thanks again for watching, for liking. And if you don't already, please do subscribe if you'd like to see more of these. And I'll be back very soon with another bookish video for you. And until then, see you later.